for that pec minor to really get that arm up and retract, depress. Actually, you want to depress your body, but you want to elevate your scapula and having it up and be rotated. So the function of the pectoralis minor, does the pec minor have shoulder function? No, that's a good pin to have in there, right? It's tempting. Yeah, I'm going to work out chest, I'm going to work out my pec major and my pec minor. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying your pec major is going to be when you move your shoulder, and your pec minor is going to be when you move your scapula. Contributing to that functional circle. What is the function of the serratus anterior? Pulls in a direction of protraction, also upper rotation of the scapula. Protractor, upper rotator. All right, traps. We are going to refer to them as upper and lower. We're going to try to keep it simple, okay? Upper fibers, you can even visualize it. If this was the spine of the scapula, right? This is the spine. Notice how all of those upper fibers are trying to do this with their pull. And that number 4 is going to be our lower one that's trying to do the exact same thing, just pulling in a different direction. Instead of pulling up and across, it's pulling down and across. But they're both trying to rotate the same. So this is the illustration that's actually on Google. So this might work for you better, but if it doesn't, there's a ton of different illustrations that you can use. So what's the function of the trapezius? The whole fan-shaped muscle pulls in a direction of retraction, and all the fan pulls in a direction of upper rotation. How does the fan split apart? The upper fibers pull in the direction of elevation, where the lower pulls in the direction of depression. All right, let's get to these guys. Rhomboids, plural, major and minor, they're sister muscles. So we just typically refer to them as rhomboids. It's kind of as a T. But again, that can get tricky, because if you say rhomboids, you mean the right and the left, But the rhomboids, typically plural, is just major and minor because they have the same function. But look, we should have done this enough where now we should look at the way a muscle runs and say, well, what direction of motion is it pulling in? Is this a front or a back view? Is this a posterior or an anterior view? Posterior, and muscles can only pull. So is it trying to pull the scapula to the spine, or is it trying to push the scapula away from the spine? Trying to pull it towards the spine. So that would make the rhomboids retractors. Now that would be, if we look at traditional mechanics, X's and Y's, and that muscle has some obliquity to it, right? It's angled. So the X component of the pull, the horizontal component of that pull, is trying to bring the scapula to the spine, retract it. But there's a verticalness to the pull as well. The Y component, the up component of its pull. So the vertical component, in other words, if let's say we nerve block every other muscle, or we extracted every other muscle, and then we just pulled on this muscle by itself, technically it would try to pull the scapula to the spine and up the spinal column. Across and up. Does that make sense? So the rhomboids also have an elevation pull, pulling in the direction of scapular elevation. Retractors, elevators, and now the fun one is, let's again use our spine of the scapula. Everybody understand this represents the spine, right? Can everybody visualize how that muscle would be pulling in a way under the spine, but instead of pulling in a direction of upper rotation like the lower trap, It's pulling in the direction of downward rotation. Everybody see that? So the rhomboids, retractors, elevators, downward rotators. Levator scapula has the same function. Obviously, it's a lot steeper, right? So as we kind of get up to the levator scapula, the elevator of the scapula, the elevation pull is going to be kind of obvious. The downward rotation isn't going to be as obvious. I'll be totally honest with you. When you're in anatomical position, that levator scapula doesn't really have a lot of mechanical downward rotation component. However, can you imagine if this is, let's say this is the little triangle that the levator scapula is pulling from, and we upwardly rotate the scapula, and you see how I want to pull you back down? So I list it as a downward rotator because when you're doing pull type exercises, that muscle is very much involved in 99.9%. It's just like once you get it down, then it kind of doesn't have that pull anymore. It's kind of just more about elevator retractor. Okay, let's check it out. So things that would spin this way would be upward rotators, right? So things that would spin this way would be downward rotators. So the levator scapula would be a downward rotator. It's a little freaky because again, this isn't a traditional circle. But I think it's listed right. If things that are trying to spin this way are upward, then things that are spinning this way would be downward. Okay? Thank you for asking that, though. I guarantee you there's other people that were thinking the same thing. Keep in mind, guys, these circles are just tools. They're tools to help you learn function. However, if you guys are like, that just doesn't work for me, that's fine. I'm never going to ask you to draw a circle on your test. You're more than welcome to just learn them or do lists. Some people do lists, that's fine. But they're just tools, so that way you can see all the different functions, but you only have to see the muscle once. You don't have to put it in, you don't have to have the same muscle in several lists. All right, let's review everything for your scapula. Make sure we're all on the same page. Who are the scapular elevators, the ones that pull in the direction of elevation? We have upper trapezius, those fibers that pull superiorly. We have our rhomboids and levator scapula that are trying to pull us up and across. In this case, the upward component is not important. Who are our scapular depressors? Pec minor, lower tract. Now, is this the whole story? Of course not. This isn't the whole story. That rabbit hole gets deep. If John's laying down on the table and I take his wrist and I pull down, wouldn't I be pulling in a direction of depression by default because his arm is connected to his socket, and if I pull this down, it's going to pull the scapula down. My point is that when you're doing, dips and you depress the scapula, that takes a lot of force, more force than just these couple little muscles. So my point is that yes, your pecs and your lats and all that stuff, by pulling on the humerus, they can pull on your scapula, yes. But that's for graduate school. Here, I'm just trying to teach you the muscles that are actually pulling directly on the scapula. The ones that are actually tugging on the scapula itself. Those are the muscles that have a lot to do with posture. Those are the muscles that have a lot to do with your scapular position of posture. Okay? Elevators, pressors, retractors, trapezius, the traps. You don't have to go redundant. You don't have to say trapezius upper and lower. That's saying the same thing. On your circle, I have them separately to communicate function. you guys have to remind yourself, like I said, connect the dots or make a note that, hey, these are two sections of the same muscle. They're not two separate muscles. But we have precedent. We've done that before. In other parts, the deltoid, we did it where we have separate things, but they were part of the same muscle. Okay. Retractors, trapezius, rhomboids, levator scapula. Protractors, pec minor, serratus anterior. Upper rotators, trapezius, serratus anterior. And they have their own unique force couple, where you got traps doing this on the top end, and the serratus anterior pulling the feet on the bottom end. That's a lot of force. Force couples within the force couples. Downward rotators, pec minor, rhomboids, levator scapula. What I want to show you, the last part, is, do you guys remember how we talked about the obliques crisscrossing, right? And external, internal crisscross, and they had different rotational pulls, but they had the same pull in the sagittal and the frontal. They had different transverse pulls, but they crisscross. The same concept happens with the rhomboids and the lower trapezius. So notice how number 4, right, the lower trap, they have different rhomboids, lower trap. They crisscross. So that tells me they're going to have different rotational pulls, but they're going to have the same retraction pull. They're going to work together in this way. They're going to have a different elevation and depression pull, but that's all good. That just cancels each other out. When you really need retractors, having things that cancel out. Crisscross. Why do you guys think that it's common to have real tight protractors? What is some, I'm not asking you to recite scientific research, just what do you think some things happen in our everyday lives that kind of tend for us to be? Remember the analogy I gave in 310 where if you put somebody in a sling, athletics, we don't like to sling unless we have to, right? Because you atrophy, you lose muscle, you get stiff. Bad things happen when you immobilize. Now again, sometimes there's a necessity to, but if there's not, we don't want to immobilize. But you can imagine if you put your arm in a sling for an experiment for a couple weeks, when you get out, you're going to be stiff, that muscle is going to atrophy. So in 310, I mentioned stuff like sometimes our activities of daily living naturally put us in slings that we don't really think about. Like being seated for extended periods of time. In other words, when you're in a sling, your elbow is flexed, your flexors are shortened, and your body eats that up, man. It's gonna eat it up in series. When you're sitting for long periods of time, your knees are flexed and your hips are flexed. And when we're watching TV or working on our computer or driving in our car, we tend to be protracted. It's very similar. It's a very common posture that our generation has, not because we're lazy, it's just we work differently than our ancestors did, right? And we have tools to do things in positions that they didn't have. So some of you might one day take your biomechanics and apply it to work, occupational biomechanics. We call it ergonomics. Maybe some of you have heard of it.